Welcome back to The Researcher's Path, From Idea to Thesis, Episode 2, Where Do I Start? Last time, we explored the profound why behind research, really digging into its importance and how it shapes our understanding. Now we're diving straight into the practical stuff, the what and how. Choosing a research topic. Well, it's truly the very first seed of any meaningful project, isn't it? But let's be honest, for many of us, it can feel incredibly daunting. You might be sitting there wondering, okay, what if I'm interested in way too many things? How do I pick just one? Or maybe I have absolutely no idea where to even start. That's a common one. Or even, how do I know if this idea I have is actually original or, if it's valid? Yeah. So today, our mission is pretty clear. We want to walk you through a practical roadmap, something to help you define and then refine your research direction, going from that initial brainstorming, that kind of messy phase, all the way to shaping your central questions. We really want to help you transform that initial uncertainty, the feeling of being overwhelmed, into real clarity, give you a solid, confident starting point for your entire research journey.
That's exactly right. Think of this first stage, maybe not as a rigid checklist, but more like laying the fundamental blueprint for a sturdy building.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just start hammering nails randomly without a clear vision, right? It just wouldn't work. So this first step, choosing and refining your research topic, is precisely that foundational work. And to help you build that robust foundation, we want to introduce you to a really crucial set of criteria. These are things you can use to evaluate any potential research topic you might be considering. Now, sometimes this process is simplified down to what people call the golden triangle, interest, originality, and feasibility. But the academic community, well, they often use a more comprehensive framework. It's encapsulated in the mnemonic FINER, F-I-N-E-R.
A golden triangle. That sounds good and easy to understand, but FINER, what does that stand for?
Yeah, and FINER stands for feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. These 5 criteria are absolutely essential. Think of them as your early warning system. They help ensure your research isn't just impactful and contribute something valuable, but also that it's actually achievable. You can actually do it. They steer you away from those projects that might look fantastic on paper, but are, well, in reality, totally impractical or maybe even impossible to execute.
Ugh. Yeah, that sounds really useful, like a checklist to keep you grounded.
Exactly. So let's unpack each one, starting with I for interest, your personal passion, your genuine curiosity. These are, without exaggeration, the absolute fuel that will drive your entire research endeavor. Look, research is a marathon. It's often filled with unexpected detours, frustrating roadblocks, moments where progress feels incredibly slow.
Oh, definitely. I think everyone experiences that.
Right. And if you don't have a genuine interest in your topic, if it feels like a chore right from the beginning, you're going to struggle. You'll struggle to sustain the motivation needed to push through those inevitable challenges. Our sources are really clear on this. If you're truly interested in your topic, chances are others will find it interesting too. And maybe just as importantly, the whole process becomes a lot more engaging, maybe even enjoyable, rather than just a task that you have to complete.
So passion isn't just nice to have. It's actually essential for persistence.
Absolutely vital.
So how do you cultivate this interest? How do you find that initial spark, especially if you're feeling a bit lost?
One really effective method is to keep an interest log or diary. And this isn't just, jotting down random ideas. It's a dedicated space, a place where you actively brainstorm broad concepts, explore intriguing questions that pop into your head, and consistently look for patterns or recurring themes that genuinely catch your attention.
So paying attention to what naturally grabs you.
Precisely. What topics do you find yourself Googling late at night? What conversations truly energize you? What articles do you click on? Record those. And don't underestimate those seemingly aimless pursuits either. Things like just surfing the internet, maybe exploring new subreddits, or even just quiet, reflective walks. These can stimulate creative thinking. They can help you find new insights, connecting ideas you might not have consciously linked before, nurturing a wide variety of interests, even hobbies and pastimes that seem totally unrelated to your field can significantly contribute to your creative problem solving. It might help you stumble upon really unexpected research angles.
That's encouraging. It means just being curious in general can feed into research. Okay, moving on to N for novelty or originality.
This is all about identifying your unique contribution, what we often call the gap in existing knowledge. Novelty essentially means your research will contribute something genuinely new to the conversation, to the existing body of knowledge. It's about identifying what isn't already known, what hasn't been adequately explored, or maybe what could be understood in a better, more nuanced way. As one academic source puts it, a novel project means there is a gap in the knowledge, and therefore there is a need for new evidence on the topic. That's quite direct.
So, finding that empty space on the bookshelf, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this criterion is profoundly crucial. It prevents redundant research, which nobody wants, and it ensures your work has a meaningful, lasting impact. Think about it. If the answer to your research question is already easily found in published literature, your project, unfortunately, it lacks a strong justification.
Right. Why reinvent the wheel?
Precisely. Why invest significant time, energy, resources to discover something that's already well established? Our sources specifically cautioned against topics that add nothing new because, as they warn, the reader will soon realize that the answer can be easily found in the published literature. Your peers will notice. Now, sometimes maybe new data alone might spark some interest, especially among highly specialized experts in a niche field. But the ultimate goal, the really impactful research, it aims for a problem whose solution genuinely makes all of us see the world in a new way. That's the hallmark of great research. It distinguishes it from just, adding another brick to an already existing wall. It's more about building a new wing or maybe even digging a new foundation for understanding.
Okay, so novelty is about pushing the boundary, not just filling space. Next up is F for feasibility. Does this simply mean, can you actually do it?
Exactly. This criterion asks a really fundamental practical question. Feasibility is all about the nuts and bolts, the practicality of conducting your research given your available resources. That includes your time, the money you might need, and the skills you currently possess or can reasonably acquire. It ensures your research design is adequate and, crucially, achievable within real-world constraints. This covers things like, can you actually recruit enough participants for your study? Is your sample size achievable? Do you have access to the necessary human resources like collaborators or technical resources like lab equipment or software? And can you do all of this within an appropriate and affordable time frame?
That makes a lot of sense. So if I have a fantastic, incredibly interesting idea, one that sparks my passion and seems really novel, but maybe it's not feasible, how do I recognize that? What's the most common trap researchers fall into when they're judging feasibility? Could you give us an example of a topic that might initially seem brilliant, but turns out not to be feasible in practice?
That's an excellent question, and it's a very common stumbling block. A lot of enthusiasm can sometimes blind you to practicalities. One of the most common traps is mistaking a really interesting idea for an implementable one, or just drastically underestimating the practical hurdles. You might, for example, judge something infeasible because it seems unlikely to happen in your ideal scenario rather than actually impossible. Or maybe the opposite. You assume something is feasible just because it should be or because it's important, even if the resources simply aren't there.
Right. Wishful thinking versus reality check.
Exactly. Let's consider an example. Think about a clinical trial, maybe for a medical condition with an extremely low incidence of cases, perhaps a rare genetic disorder that affects only a handful of people worldwide each year.
Now, the research could be absolutely life-changing for those affected, highly relevant, highly ethical, but recruiting enough participants for a statistically significant sample size might be nearly impossible within a reasonable time frame and budget. This makes it infeasible, perhaps not for a massive global consortium, but certainly for an individual researcher or a smaller team. You simply can't find enough people.
So practical constraints are key.
Absolutely. Beyond data availability and sample size, there are several other critical constraints. Time is a massive one. Your project must be completable within a reasonable time frame, especially if you're working towards a thesis deadline or a grant reporting period. Resources are also key. This is a broad category. It includes money, personnel, and time, all finite resources. And the advice here is quite struck. If these are not adequate, it is prudent not to start the project.
Better to know upfront.
Much better. It's better to pivot early than invest significant effort into something that's doomed to fail due to lack of resources. Now, sometimes you can scale down a project. That's an option. But you have to be brutally honest about the implications of that decision. How will scaling down affect your research's scope, its depth, the significance of its findings? And finally, consider your skills. Does the topic fall within the area of your specialization, or will it require you to acquire entirely new skills, like maybe advanced statistical modeling you've never done, or proficiency in a niche programming language, or even fluency in another language for archival work? Can you reasonably learn those skills within your time frame alongside doing the actual research? These honest assessments are crucial.
It sounds like a lot of self-assessment is needed early on.
Definitely. And it's worth noting that feasibility studies, especially in fields like public health, are designed specifically for this. They aim to determine if an intervention or idea should even be recommended for further testing. They focus on pragmatic questions like, can it work here?
Explicitly addressing these very practical feasibility concerns.
Okay, got it. Interest, novelty, feasibility. What's next in finer?
Next is E for ethical considerations, and this is crucial. These are not an afterthought. They aren't just forms to fill out later. Ethical considerations begin at the very first stage, right when you're formulating your research questions. They permeate every single step of your study. Your study, especially if it involves human experience, inevitably has ethical, to say nothing of a political consequence. As the researcher, you have a profound moral obligation. You need to assess how your inquiry positions you relative to your participants. This is especially true when working with vulnerable or with marginalized populations. You have to think deeply about the implications of your research for their lives, for their well-being.
So it's about responsibility from the outset.
Absolutely. There are established principles, like the World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki, which provides ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. These serve as guiding frameworks. And these aren't just bureaucratic hurdles. They're designed to protect individuals and communities. They embody core values. Now, sometimes these ethical concerns can feel a bit paralyzing. You might worry, will I silence myself worrying about harming them? Or how can I possibly represent their experience accurately and respectfully?
Yeah, that weight of responsibility.
It's real. But the best practice isn't paralysis. It's ongoing engagement. It's having meaningful conversations with supervisors, peers, ethics boards, sometimes even with community representatives. It involves continuous reflection throughout the entire inquiry process. It's about proactive engagement and responsibility, not just reactive compliance after something goes wrong.
Thinking ethically throughout, not just at the approval stage.
Precisely.
And finally, for our infiner, we have relevance. This asks the ultimate question. Why does it matter to others? What so?
Correct. Relevance means your research is significant. It contributes genuine value, maybe to your specific field, maybe to a professional practice, maybe to a wider societal debate. It ties directly back to that so what question we keep mentioning. As one of our sources powerfully puts it, ask yourself what will be lost if you don't answer your question. How will not answering it keep us from understanding something else better than we do?
That really frames the stakes.
It does. For clinical research, relevance might mean the paper may contribute to change the clinical practice, leading directly to improved patient outcomes. That's clear relevance. In a broader academic sense, your project should ideally fit with the mission of the organization you're part of or contribute meaningfully to the broader academic field. This is key for a successful dissertation or thesis. Ultimately, your research should be appropriate to the study field and aligned with its goals. This ensures your work has purpose and impact beyond just satisfying your personal curiosity or fulfilling a degree requirement. If you can't clearly articulate why someone else should care about your research, then it's likely not relevant enough. You need to be able to answer that so what convincingly.
Okay, so finer, feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, relevant. That's a really solid framework for evaluating ideas.
It is. It helps you move from just having an idea to having a viable research idea.
So now that we've established those foundational criteria, let's transition to the actual journey. How do you get from a vague idea, maybe just a flicker of curiosity, to a focused, concrete research problem?
Research typically begins not with a precise, fully formed question, but with a broad subject. For example, artificial intelligence in medicine. That's a huge subject area, a vast landscape. Your initial task, then, is to find a specific topic within that vast subject, something much narrower, like maybe AI and diagnosing rare pediatric conditions. See how much more focused that is.
Right, moving from the continent to a specific city or even a neighborhood.
Exactly. But it's crucial to understand that a topic isn't just a narrowed subject. That's part of it, but not the whole story. It's fundamentally an approach to a subject, one that asks a question whose answer solves a problem that your readers care about. This transformation from a general subject to a focused, problem-driven topic, that's where the magic and, honestly, the hard work of research truly begins.
So that really resonates. If I have a broad interest like artificial intelligence in medicine, or maybe something completely different like the history of aviation, how do I even begin to narrow that down? How do I make it a researchable topic? It just feels like there are a million directions to go in, and it's so easy to get overwhelmed or lost.
You've absolutely hit on a common challenge. It can feel overwhelming at first, like trying to drink from a fire hose, as they say. But there are several effective brainstorming techniques you can use to manage that initial exploration and begin to narrow your focus systematically. First, leverage your personal curiosity. Go back to that interest log we talked about. Think about those special interests you have outside of academia. Maybe it's sailing or chess or even collecting old comic books.
Yeah.
Now, investigate aspects of those hobbies or interests that you don't know much about. Just start asking questions. For instance, if you love cooking, maybe you could explore the historical evolution of specific culinary techniques or the precise scientific reactions behind flavor profiles. Even a travel destination that fascinated you could spark ideas if you start surfing the internet, looking for something that genuinely surprises you or makes you ask why or how.
Turning personal interests into research angles.
Exactly. Second, and this might sound counterintuitive, capitalize on your inexperience. As a novice in a field or even just in a particular workplace or context, you actually have a unique advantage, a fresh perspective. You can legitimately question policies and procedures or common workarounds or those pet theories that veteran practitioners might take for granted, things they do because we've always done it that way, but which maybe lack solid evidence.
So asking the dumb questions isn't actually dumb.
Not at all. Don't be afraid to ask, why do we do it that way? Even well-accepted practices should not be unassailable. This fresh, perhaps initially naive perspective can actually unveil overlooked problems or inefficiencies that seasoned professionals might no longer even see because they're too close to it.
Interesting. Okay, what else?
Third, getting those initial overviews, getting the lay of the land. Begin by skimming general resources, things like encyclopedia entries. Encyclopedia Britannica is great, but also look for specialized encyclopedias in your field. They often provide excellent starting points. Use academic search engines like Google Scholar, but don't just look at the first page. Skim the results. Pay close attention to subheadings and articles. Read abstracts. Look at keywords. These often indicate how others have already narrowed similar areas or what the current debates and key terms are. And yes, Wikipedia, while you wouldn't cite it in your final paper, is actually excellent for initial background reading. It gives quick summaries and often links to more credible sources you could then follow up on.
So using Wikipedia as a launch pad, not the destination.
Precisely. And another tip, reading through the project abstracts or even the literature reviews of other students in your department or program can provide really practical insight into how they define their research problems. See how they navigated this process.
That's a good practical tip.
Okay, so once you have a broad area and maybe some initial fuzzy ideas, the next step is a preliminary literature review. This is absolutely critical for informing your topic selection and helping you formulate your problem. Now, this isn't your comprehensive final literature review, that comes later. This is an early, targeted reading phase. Its main goal is to help you quickly understand what's already known about your potential topic. And, maybe more importantly, where the gaps in knowledge lie. Where are the unanswered questions, the controversies? As one source states, a comprehensive review of the topic is imperative as it allows the researcher to identify this gap in the literature.
So reading to find out what isn't known, not just what is known.
Exactly. And for this preliminary stage, it's vital to distinguish between source types and how to use them strategically. You start with tertiary sources, those general encyclopedias, maybe textbooks, some popular publications. These are excellent for getting that initial feel for a topic. They offer broad summaries, context. They're your starting gate. Then, you quickly move to secondary sources. These are the scholarly books and articles based on primary research intended for academic or professional audiences. Think peer-reviewed journal articles, academic monographs, dissertations. These are absolutely crucial for understanding the ongoing conversation in your field.
Okay, so tertiary for orientation, secondary for the real substance.
That's a good way to think about it. Tertiary sources get you oriented, right? But you need to move into secondary sources quickly to truly understand the depth of existing research and pinpoint those specific research opportunities, those gaps. And please remember, research is often described as not like strolling along an easy, well-marked path. It's more like zigzagging up and down a rocky hill through overgrown woods, sometimes in a fog.
That sounds about right.
It often feels like that. So this initial literature review, it isn't a one-and-done step. You don't just read a few articles and say, okay, I'm done. Right? You'll constantly be reading, learning, refining your understanding, and that new understanding might lead you to modify your topic. You might narrow it further or even shift direction entirely as you uncover new information or realize certain avenues are just dead ends. You have to embrace that iterative process. It's genuinely part of the discovery. Don't fight it.
So it's okay if the initial idea changes quite a bit as I read more.
Not just okay, it's expected. It's a sign you're engaging deeply. A great example of this zigzagging and refining is a story about a student, let's call her Anna, who was assigned Antarctica as a topic. Initially, she knew basically nothing about it, just ice and penguins maybe. Her initial skimming of Wikipedia, a tertiary source, remember, led her to a surprising fact. Antarctica is technically a desert.
Really? A desert?
Yeah, based on precipitation levels. That was a true aha moment for her.
It completely reoriented her thinking, and that surprise sparked further questions. Instead of just writing generally about the continent, she started moving towards specific, compelling details she found intriguing, like, why did Robert Falcon Scott's doomed expedition team carry heavy geological rocks even when they were desperate, starving, freezing?
That is a fascinating question.
Isn't it? Or why did they die just 11 miles from a massive supply depot, despite leaving these meticulously detailed diary entries? What went wrong? That moment of surprise, it's a desert, followed by deeper probing into these anomalies and unanswered questions. That's exactly the kind of intellectual curiosity and iterative narrowing that helps you transform a broad, boring subject into a truly fascinating, researchable topic.
Finding the puzzle within the subject.
Beautifully put. And this brings us directly to identifying the gap, that sweet spot for your unique contribution. Your research problem, the thing your research will actually address, it truly arises from identifying that hole, that missing piece, or that area of ambiguity in the existing knowledge. And this gap can manifest in several ways. Maybe the evidence is scarce, simply put, not much has been done on this specific question. Or perhaps the existing literature yields conflicting results, meaning there's a live debate, scholars disagree, and your research could help resolve it. Or maybe the results could be improved, suggesting current methods, theories, or solutions are inadequate, and you have an idea for a better way. This is precisely your opportunity, your entry point to contribute something genuinely new and valuable.
So, the gap isn't necessarily something totally unknown. It could be a conflict or an imperfection in what is known.
Exactly. And in academic research, remember, a problem isn't something negative to avoid or lament. It's actually something we seek out, even invent if we have to, in the sense that we uncover it, define it, bring it into focus. It's all about finding an unresolved puzzle or an area where current understanding is flawed, incomplete, or maybe just ripe for reinterpretation through a new lens.
Okay, so how do we actively find these elusive gaps? It sounds a bit like detective work.
It kind of is. One very practical way is to actively look for questions that authors in your sources don't answer. Read closely, especially the discussion and conclusion sections of papers. Many journal articles, particularly good ones, conclude not just with summaries of their findings, but with explicit open questions or direct suggestions for more research.
They literally point you towards the gap sometimes.
They often do. These are often direct invitations. You might be able to carve out a piece of it for your own project. They're giving you clues. Another useful technique, maybe slightly unconventional, is to lurk in online spaces. Online discussion forums, professional communities on platforms like LinkedIn, or specialized forums, even academic listservs related to your topic. By simply reading the exchanges, observing the conversations, you can quickly get a sense of the kinds of questions, the current debates, the unresolved issues that genuinely interest specialists and practitioners in the field right now.
So, listening in on the expert conversations.
Exactly. What are they complaining about? What problems are they still trying to figure out? What new tools or techniques are causing buzz or confusion? Also, actively seek out competing views in secondary sources. Don't just read authors you agree with. Try to understand why rational, intelligent people hold different perspectives on a subject. Analyzing those disagreements can help you refine your own argument, spot logical weaknesses in existing work, and identify opportunities where your research could contribute clarity or resolution. Experienced researchers do this all the time. They use those competing views to sharpen their own arguments and find new angles for inquiry.
Okay, find the unanswered questions, listen to the current debates, and analyze the disagreements. That's actionable.
It is. So once you think you've identified a promising gap, the next crucial step is framing the problem. This means translating that identified gap into a clear, concise problem statement. A research problem, formally defined, is a clear and concise statement of the question or issue with the goal of finding a solution or answer. It essentially encapsulates an area of concern, a condition to be improved upon, a difficulty to be eliminated, or a troubling question that exists in theory or in practice.
This statement provides the core rationale, the foundational justification for why your study is important and necessary. It answers the why bother question.
Okay, so it's more formal than just saying there's a gap.
Yes, it articulates the significance of that gap. And it's important here to distinguish between two broad types of problems: conceptual problems and practical problems. They differ in their nature, their costs, and their solutions. A practical problem stems from a real-world condition that has tangible, often measurable costs. Think about things you can directly feel or count. A business losing money, a community facing a health crisis, maybe even just dealing with excessive email spam in an organization. These are practical problems. The solution to a practical problem typically involves doing something tangible to mitigate that cost, to change the situation. For example, understanding how constituents truly feel about a policy helps a politician decide where they stand, potentially avoiding electoral losses, a tangible cost.
Right, solving a real-world pain point.
Exactly. A conceptual problem, on the other hand, is different. Here, the condition isn't a tangible loss, but simply not knowing or not understanding something. The cost isn't money lost or votes lost, but rather a lack of clarity, a missing piece in our collective intellectual puzzle, an inconsistency in theory, maybe. The solution, therefore, involves gaining greater understanding, achieving more clarity, or contributing to a richer life of the mind, as one source puts it. Many projects in the humanities and pure sciences fall squarely into this category.
Like figuring out a historical mystery or a fundamental scientific principle.
Precisely. For instance, not knowing how many galaxies are in the sky, that's the condition of not knowing, might prevent us from understanding whether the universe will expand forever. That's the abstract intellectual cost of not knowing. For both types of problems, practical and conceptual, that so what test is absolutely key. It helps you articulate the problem's significance. If you keep asking yourself, so what, about your problem, about its condition and costs, and you consistently struggle to find a satisfying answer, then you probably haven't yet convinced yourself there's a compelling problem worth solving, and you certainly won't convince your future readers.
And so that so what question is the ultimate gatekeeper for the problem statement.
It really is. So to help you articulate your research problem clearly and ensure it has both purpose and relevance, we strongly recommend using a robust 3-step formula. It really helps structure your thinking. You start with step 1, topic, I'm studying, era. Just name your specific topic clearly. Then you add step 2, question, gap. Quote, because I want to find out what, how, or how, era. This articulates the specific question you're asking or the knowledge gap you're directly addressing. Finally, you complete the statement with step 3, significance, so what? Quote, in order to help my reader understand, era is, this defines the clear significance, the payoff, the so what for your target audience, who benefits from this knowledge and how.
That 3-part structure sounds incredibly helpful. It seems like it forces you to connect the dots from topic to question to relevance, making the whole thing concrete and researchable. Could we walk through a concrete example, taking maybe that AI idea and transforming it into a clear problem statement using that exact 3-part structure? I think seeing it applied would really solidify it.
Absolutely. Let's do that. It's a powerful tool precisely because it makes your purpose explicit, both for you and for others. Let's revisit that initial broad interest we discussed, artificial intelligence in medicine. And remember, we narrowed the topic to AI in diagnosing rare pediatric conditions.
Got it.
Now, applying the formula, your problem statement might look something like this. Step 1, topic. I am studying the application of artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning algorithms, in pediatric diagnostics. Okay, that's your clearly defined topic. Step 2, question gap. Quote, because I want to find out how accurately these AI algorithms can identify specific rare genetic disorders in children much earlier than current methods based on analyzing complex patterns in early symptom data and maybe genomic information.
That's your specific question, the precise gap you're addressing, focusing on how accurately and earlier identification. Step 3, significance. So what? In order to help pediatricians, genetic counselors, and potentially healthcare policymakers understand whether these AI tools can significantly reduce diagnostic delays, improve early intervention outcomes, and ultimately lessen the burden on families dealing with these challenging conditions, which are often missed or misdiagnosed for years. And that's the clear significance for your readers, pediatricians, counselors, policymakers, and the potential impact on patients and families.
Wow. Okay. Seeing it laid out like that, it makes the whole project feel so much more focused and purposeful. You know exactly what you're doing and why it matters.
Exactly. This structured approach ensures your project has that clear purpose and direct relevance right from the outset. It makes it much easier for you as the researcher to stay on track and for your audience to immediately grasp its importance and potential impact.
Brilliant. So problem statement nailed down. What comes next in this journey?
Right. Once you have that well-defined problem statement, you move to the core intellectual endeavor of your research, formulating precise research questions and potentially hypotheses. Let's start with research questions. A research question is formally defined as a narrow, challenging question addressing an issue, problem, or controversy that is answered with a conclusion based on the analysis and interpretation of evidence. More simply, it precisely defines exactly what the researcher is trying to find out. It's the guiding star for your investigation.
The specific thing you need to answer.
Exactly. And these questions are absolutely central to any study, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. They guide your entire research process, everything from selecting your specific research design, choosing your methodology for collecting data, how you analyze that data, and ultimately how you shape your conclusions. Every strategic decision you make in your project should flow from and help answer your research questions.
So getting the questions right is fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. So what makes a good research question? There are several key characteristics. First, it must be specific and focused. Good questions are specific, clear, and meticulously avoid vagueness or ambiguity. A vague question leads to an aimless, unfocused search for information. Second, they must always be interrogative, meaning they're posed in question form, ending with a question mark. A statement of fact is not a research question. Third, they must be researchable. This is key. You can't answer them with a quick Google search or by looking up a single fact in a book. They require systematic evidence gathering, analysis, and interpretation.
So no easily Googled answers.
Right. Fourth, they should be logically related, clearly connected to your broader topic, and importantly, your problem statement. They should feel like natural extensions of the problem you've defined, building a cohesive narrative for your research. And finally, especially for qualitative research, which often seeks depth and understanding, good questions should invite a process of exploration and discovery, rather than leading to a simple yes-no answer. They should challenge you and potentially your reader to delve deeper, uncover nuances, and perhaps even see matters from a new perspective.
Okay, specific, interrogative, researchable, related, and inviting exploration. That's a good checklist. But that specificity part, it sounds like we're moving from a simple inquiry to something that truly demands investigation. Can you give us an example of a research question that's perhaps too broad or maybe problematic in some way? And then walk us through how we might focus it to make it more effective. Nailing that narrowing process can still be tricky in practice.
Absolutely. It's a skill that definitely develops through practice and feedback. Let's take a common type of initial broad question. Someone might start with, how do teachers perceive professional development?
Yeah.
Now, on the surface, that sounds like a reasonable starting point for curiosity. But as a research question, it's generally considered too broad and lacks a reference to a specific context. You could also potentially answer it with a simple summary, generally positive but with some caveats, which isn't conducive to deep research. Who are the teachers? What kind of professional development? In what setting?
There are many unknowns.
Exactly. Another example of a problematic question is when it's actually just a statement masquerading as one, like, commercial aviation has a history. Well, yes, it does, but that's a fact, not an inquiry that leads anywhere specific in terms of research. It doesn't pose a problem or a puzzle.
Right, doesn't ask anything.
So, let's take that teacher professional development question and focus it. A much better, more focused version could be, what specific factors influence high school English teachers' perceptions of a mandatory, district-led, one-week professional development workshop focused on implementing new instructional strategies for supporting at-risk students?
Wow, okay, that's much more detailed.
See the difference? This revised question specifies who, high school English teachers, not just any teacher. It specifies what, the specific factors influencing perceptions, not just a general feeling. It specifies the context, what kind of professional development, mandatory, district-led, one-week specific topic, and where, implied high school district context. Early questions often are overly broad and can lead straight to information overload, but systematically narrowing them using those journalistic prompts, who, what, where, when, how, why, helps immensely. It systematically decreases the scope and makes your inquiry manageable and genuinely researchable.
Applying those W's and H's again.
They're incredibly useful. It's also worth quickly noting that research questions can serve different functions depending on your study's overall aim. They can be exploratory, used when you're just starting to understand a phenomenon, asking basic questions like, what is happening here? They can be explanatory, when you want to delve deeper into causes and relationships, asking why or how is this happening? They can be descriptive, aiming to characterize a group or situation, asking what are the key characteristics of this? Or sometimes, particularly in action research or critical studies, they can even be emancipatory, aiming for social change, asking what changes are needed to address this inequality.
Different goals need different kinds of questions.
Precisely. Furthermore, a single study often has one central, primary research question. This represents its main objective, the overarching puzzle it seeks to solve. And then supporting that, it might have several secondary questions. These effectively break down the broad primary question into more manageable components. These secondary questions allow for the detailed investigation of specific factors, variables, or aspects that contribute to answering the overarching primary question.
Can you give an example of that primary-secondary structure?
Sure. Let's say your primary research question is quite broad but focused. How does the implementation of formal project management methodologies impact the overall efficiency, perceived quality, and timeliness of municipal service-delivered projects in mid-sized cities? That's the big picture. Then a secondary question supporting this might be something like, to what extent can agile project management techniques compared to traditional waterfall methods be adapted to suit the unique context of public park renovation projects within these municipalities to improve stakeholder satisfaction ratings? See how the secondary question drills down into specific methodologies, agile versus waterfall, a specific project type, park renovation, and a specific outcome, stakeholder satisfaction, all of which feed into the broader primary question about overall efficiency, quality, and timeliness.
Yes, that makes it much clearer how they work together. The secondary questions unpack the primary one.
Exactly. Now, moving from questions which guide exploration to more concrete testable predictions, we arrive at hypotheses. A hypothesis is typically defined as a testable declarative statement about a relationship between two or more variables. It's formulated with the explicit intention of being proved or disproved through your empirical research. It's a specific prediction.
So less asking, more predicting.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And because they're about testing predictive relationships, hypotheses are primarily used in quantitative research. They're especially common when you're predicting how variables are related, 3G correlation, or when you're investigating potential cause and effect relationships, 3G experiments. Qualitative research, on the other hand, which typically focuses on exploration, understanding experiences in depth, and uncovering meaning, usually employs those open-ended research questions we just discussed, rather than starting with fixed predictive hypotheses. The goal is discovery, not necessarily prediction testing.
Okay, so hypotheses are mainly for the quantitative side of things.
Generally, yes. And a well-formulated research question, particularly an explanatory one from a quantitative perspective, can often be directly refined into a testable hypothesis. Why? Because the question often already contains the key variables you intend to investigate. For instance, let's take a research question like, to what extent does increasing the diversity in members within a small problem-solving group lead to higher levels of critical thinking demonstrated by the group?
Okay. Variables are group diversity and critical thinking.
Exactly. Now, a corresponding hypothesis derived from that question might be a clear prediction, like small problem-solving groups with demonstrably higher levels of member diversity measured by X criteria will exhibit significantly higher scores on standardized critical thinking assessments compared to groups with homogeneous membership. See how it takes the relationship implied in the question and turns it into a specific, measurable, and testable prediction. That's what a hypothesis does.
Yes, it makes it very concrete and testable.
And just to help ensure your questions, whether leading to hypotheses or not, are precisely formulated, especially in certain fields, it's worth mentioning structured frameworks again. We touched on them briefly, but for clinical research, the PICOT framework is incredibly common and useful. Remember population, intervention, comparator, outcome, and time frame.
Right, PICOT for clinical questions.
Let's quickly apply it again, maybe to a different area. Say your broad interest is smoking cessation. Okay, PICOT helps refine it. P for population, adult smokers trying to quit. I for intervention, using a nicotine patch combined with behavioral counseling. C for comparator, using a nicotine patch alone. O for outcome, smoking abstinence rate. T for time frame, at 6 months post-quit date. Now your research question becomes incredibly precise. In adult smokers attempting to quit, P, does using a nicotine patch combined with behavioral counseling compared to using a nicotine patch alone result in a higher smoking abstinence rate, O, at 6 months post-quit date? See how structured that is? No ambiguity.
Definitely removes the fuzziness.
And for qualitative or mixed methods research, where PICOT might not fit as well, another useful framework is SPIDER. That stands for sample, phenomenon of interest, design, evaluation, and research type. These frameworks, PICOT, SPIDER, and others like them, essentially act as powerful checklists. They help you ensure all the relevant components of your research question are explicitly considered and covered, leading to incredibly precise and actionable inquiries right from the start.
Very useful tools to keep in mind. So, as we embark on this journey, armed with our finer criteria, our problem statement formula, and these frameworks for questions, it's also vital to be aware of some common pitfalls, right?
Definitely. Knowing these traps can save you immense time, frustration, and maybe even heartache down the road. Understanding them helps you navigate more effectively. One of the most frequent and honestly debilitating issues is making your topic too broad or general. We touched on this, but it bears repeating.
The boiling the ocean problem.
Exactly. The danger here is profound. A topic that's excessively broad, like just saying the history of the internet, leads inevitably to too much information, much of it not very useful. You find yourself drowning in facts, articles, books, unable to discern what's truly relevant to any specific argument. It results in what we call information overload. And without a precise focus, any evidence you manage to assemble risks appearing to your readers as little more than a mound of random facts, just stuff you found, without a coherent argument or clear purpose connecting it all. It's like having all the bricks for a house, but absolutely no architectural plan.
Just a pile of information?
A confusing pile. So how do you avoid this? You must actively, consciously distinguish between that broad subject, like the internet, and a laser-focused topic like maybe the role of ARPANET protocols in enabling decentralized communication during the Cold War. The solution is systematic. Systematically ask questions about your broad subject. Use those journalistic prompts relentlessly. Who, what, when, where, and especially dive deep with how and why. For history of the internet, you'd ask, who were the key individual developers or institutions?
What specific technical breakthroughs were essential? When did key phases like commercialization occur? Where did early development physically happen? How did it impact, say, social interaction or business models? Why did certain technologies or standards prevail over others?
Breaking it down piece by piece.
Exactly. Continually narrow your topic by making at least one aspect more specific, deliberately decreasing its overall scope. Maybe focus on a specific time period, a specific technology, a specific group of users, a specific geographical region. And crucially, as one source strongly advises, resolve to do lots of writing along the way. Even if it's just routine note-taking, summarizing articles in your own words, or reflective journaling about your emerging ideas, writing is thinking. It helps you process, synthesize, spot connections, and ultimately narrow your focus.
Writing to figure it out, not just writing it up at the end.
Absolutely. Another significant pitfall is choosing a topic that's too niche or repetitive. This is the opposite problem of being too broad, but equally dangerous. The danger here is picking something that ultimately adds nothing truly new or significant to the existing body of knowledge. If the answer to your core research question is easily found in the published literature, maybe just by reading a couple of review articles, or if in a practical setting, administrators believe that the answer is already known and implemented, then there's really little justification for pursuing the matter.
So research needs to fill a genuine gap.
It does. Otherwise, you risk merely re-reporting what's already been established, which frankly wastes your valuable time and resources and won't impress your peers or supervisors.
How do we avoid that trap?
The antidote here is that thorough literature review. We discussed both preliminary and then a deeper dive later. Its primary goal is to identify this gap in the literature. You need to confirm whether the evidence is scarce, or if the existing literature yields conflicting results, or if the results could be improved. You need proof that your contribution is needed. Beyond just identifying obvious gaps, look for opportunities to extend existing claims, maybe apply a known theory to a completely new context or population where it hasn't been tested, or support an existing claim, but with new, unique, or more robust evidence. Don't just re-report what's been said. Your goal is always to build upon it, challenge it constructively, or offer a genuinely fresh perspective.
Adding value, not just volume.
Well said. Then there's the very real practical danger of selecting a topic that is fundamentally unrealistic or unfeasible. This means picking something that, for practical reasons, you simply cannot complete successfully. Maybe it requires access to data that's classified, proprietary, or simply doesn't exist. Maybe it demands an unrealistic amount of time to complete given your actual deadlines, like trying to do a longitudinal study over 5 years for a 1-year master's degree. Or maybe it far exceeds your available resources, whether that's funding for travel or equipment, personnel support if you need assistance, or even your own current skill set if it requires highly specialized expertise you don't have and can't quickly acquire.
The practical reality check again.
It's so important. This isn't about your intellectual capacity. It's about acknowledging real-world constraints. To avoid this, you absolutely must be proactive. Evaluate your potential topic early and honestly against that feasible criterion of finer we discussed. Before you commit significant time and energy, seriously ask yourself, do I realistically have access to the needed data or participants? Do I have adequate funding? Can I actually recruit my target population strategically and achieve a manageable, statistically sound sample size if needed? Do I have the necessary human and technical resources available, or a clear, realistic plan to acquire them? Remember, the stark advice is if money, personnel, and time are not adequate, it is prudent not to start the project. Don't fall victim to sunk cost fallacy later on.
Be honest upfront.
Be brutally honest with yourself upfront. Be willing to scale down a project if necessary. Maybe focus on a smaller aspect, a pilot study first.
But if you do scale down, understand and clearly acknowledge the implications of that scaling on the scope and significance of your findings. And please, please don't hesitate to consult with librarians, experienced researchers, your supervisors or mentors early and often about feasibility. Librarians in particular are often unsung heroes here. They can help you refine your search parameters, yes, but they also often have a very good sense of what data is accessible, what resources the institution has, and can direct you to the right tools for your specific research question. They are research navigators. Talk to them.
Good advice. Okay, one last pitfall.
Yes, the final one to really guard against is having an unclear problem statement. If your core research problem, the justification for your entire study, is vaguely defined or poorly articulated, it becomes nearly impossible to research effectively. Why? Because you lack clear direction. It's like trying to navigate a complex journey without a map or even a clear destination in mind. You'll just wander aimlessly. Without a clear problem driving your inquiry, your assembled evidence might indeed look like that mound of random facts we mentioned earlier, disconnected, without purpose, lacking a cohesive narrative that addresses a specific issue. Your readers will be confused, and frankly, you will too as you try to write it up.
So clarity on the why is paramount.
Paramount. To avoid this, ensure your problem statement, using that formula perhaps, clearly and concisely articulates the precise gap you're addressing or the specific condition to be improved upon. Regularly, ruthlessly ask yourself, so what, about every aspect of your problem statement. Force yourself to explain its significance, even if the consequences are abstract or intellectual rather than practical. Remember, if you repeatedly ask so what and you keep drawing a blank or giving a weak answer, you haven't yet convinced yourself there's a compelling problem. You need to refine it until that so what has a strong, clear answer. And finally, be incredibly precise with your language in your problem statement and throughout your early thinking. Define your key terms explicitly, especially if they're technical or if you're using a common term in a specific academic way. This precision prevents miscommunication and ensures both you and your readers understand exactly what issue you're tackling and why it genuinely matters. Precision prevents confusion.
It really does. So to wrap up our main discussion today, we've walked through these crucial initial steps of any robust research project. Choosing a compelling topic, yes, but then rigorously formulating your precise research problem. We explored how that vague idea transforms from a broad subject into a focused topic, how doing a thorough preliminary literature review helps you identify those critical gaps in existing knowledge, and how these gaps then become specific, researchable problems. And by diligently applying those finer criteria, ensure your topic is genuinely feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. You lay a truly robust foundation for your entire research endeavor.
Doing this work upfront really does save you enormous time and frustration down the line.
It definitely feels like building that strong foundation is worth the efforts. And we know, as you said, this process can feel a bit like zigzagging up and down a rocky hill, through overgrown woods, sometimes in a fog. There will likely be moments of great clarity, followed by moments of frustrating confusion.
But it's important to remember, every experienced researcher, every academic you admire has navigated this exact terrain. They've all been there. So try to embrace the iterative nature of discovery. Don't expect perfect linearity. Start brainstorming now if you haven't already. Read widely, not just narrowly. And seriously consider keeping that dedicated research journal for your hunches, those surprising ideas that pop up, your questions, and just your reflective thoughts on what you're learning and where you might go next. These first steps, they can be challenging. They often require deep introspection and maybe some tough decisions about feasibility. But they are also immensely rewarding. They really do transform that initial uncertainty, that feeling of being adrift, into a powerful sense of direction and clarity. They give you that strong beginning you need for an impactful research journey.
Looking ahead in our next episode on the researcher's path, we'll build directly on this foundation. We'll move from formulating the problem and initial questions to the next critical stage, going even deeper into the literature review, not just to find those initial gaps, but to truly understand this intellectual world, map the existing conversations, and position our own work within them. And then flowing from that deeper understanding, we'll start exploring how to select the right methodologies, the specific tools and techniques you'll use to gather the evidence needed to rigorously answer our newly refined research questions.
Okay, so literature review, in-depth, and methodology selection. That's totally the logical next step.
And you, our listener, as you embark on your own research journey, maybe mull over this thought. The most impactful discoveries, the research that truly changes things, often begin not with finding a neat, known answer, but with the profound clarity and courage required to ask a truly insightful question. A question perhaps no one thought to ask before, or one that challenges existing assumptions. A question so compelling it reshapes what we think we know and compels us and others to see the world, even a small part of it, in a completely new way. That's often where the real breakthroughs lie.